Russian President Vladimir Putin has renewed his stance on supporting Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. In a surprise meeting with the Syrian Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim in Moscow, Putin stressed that Russia's support for Syria, the Syrian leadership and people, remains unchanged. Putin also called on the countries in the Middle East to help Syria with its fight against terrorist groups which have plagued the Arab nation. Later, al-Muallim attended a joint press conference with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. The Russian foreign minister promised to provide assistance to bolster the Syrian state in its fight against terrorism.
We are in solidarity with the Syrian people who are fighting against the terrorist groups. We provide assistance to strengthen your ability to stand against this evil, and we will continue this policy.
Lavrov also said the expansion of terrorism in the region requires no pretext to delay a political process. The Syrian foreign minister, for his side, said that the Kremlin has promised to back Damascus politically, economically, and militarily. Syria's violence, fueled by Takfiri groups, has killed more than 220,000 people since 2011. James Jatras is a former U.S. Senate foreign policy analyst who joins us from Washington. James Jatras, why do you think at this time Russia would come out and the Russian president come out renewing his stance on supporting Bashar al-Assad?
For the past few weeks, there's been a lot of media to the effect that somehow the Russians are cutting their ties with Assad or downgrading their commitment to the government in Damascus. I have been somewhat skeptical of these reports. I assume these were simply coming from the Saudi propaganda machine supporting the terrorist groups in Syria. Perhaps Moscow felt it was necessary to clarify their position. In a sense, there's nothing surprising about this. This is fully in accord with the principles that Russia has taken on the Syria conflict and against this kind of terrorism.
And looking at the situation overall, we're looking at give and take, which has become a pattern on the ground. And then, of course, on the political side, there hasn't been much of a major motion that leads to a political solution. How do you foresee Syria as a whole in terms of any type of solution coming about?
It's still hard to be optimistic. We still have the United States supporting the so-called moderate terrorists, as if there was such a thing as a moderate terrorist, and then the Saudis, the Turks, the Qataris, and others supporting these overtly terroristic forces, including Al-Qaeda, the Al-Nusra Front, the local affiliate of Al-Qaeda. Until that changes, it's hard to see how there can be a change in this destructive pattern. What we really need is a genuine negotiation just among Syrians. And there are genuine opposition elements that can be engaged in a dialogue with the government, but not al-Nusra, not ISIS. It's necessary for the foreign backers of these terrorists to take a step back and stop doing this, but I don't see them doing that right now.
And quickly, if you can, final question here. Turkey is positioning itself and its armed forces. Really can't distinguish between that being Turkey or NATO acting. Perhaps you can tell us, there are some reports indicating these forces are going to come into Syria. Perhaps that's going to lead to a buffer zone. What is your impression of that if were to happen?
That's highly disturbing. The Turks' price, so to speak, for a no-fly zone, a buffer zone, and so forth, other proposals in the past has been that it has to be directed against the Assad government as much as against the so-called Islamic State. I don't know if that has changed, but certainly any Turkish incursion into Syria is only trouble, especially since the Turks will then claim that they are the aggrieved party and invoke NATO to defend them.
Thank you very much for that. James Jatras, former U.S. Senate foreign policy analyst from Washington.